The gunshot split the air like thunder, and Vivian Garrison clutched her reticule tighter as the stagecoach lurched to a sudden halt. Through the small window, the New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail that wound through the scrubland toward Aztec. It was May 1882, and Vivian had left everything behind in Boston to start anew in the West. "Everybody out, now!" The harsh command was followed by another shot. The driver's body thudded to the ground outside. Vivian's fellow passengers, an elderly couple and a sweaty businessman, exchanged terrified glances. The businessman was first to comply, raising his hands as he descended. Vivian helped the elderly woman down before following, her blue traveling dress catching on the step. 5 masked men on horseback surrounded the coach, rifles raised. The tallest one, clearly the leader, dismounted. "Valuables, all of them." He thrust a canvas sack toward the passengers. "Jewelry, cash, watches, everything." Vivian surrendered her mother's silver locket and the envelope containing most of her savings, $200 that was meant to establish her new life. The businessman reluctantly parted with his gold pocket watch, while the elderly couple offered their modest possessions. "Search the coach," the leader commanded 2 of his men, "and hurry." Someone might have heard the shots. While they ransacked the luggage, the leader circled Vivian. "Pretty thing like you traveling alone. That's unusual." Vivian stared straight ahead, refusing to show fear. "I'm meeting family in Aztec," he laughed. "Is that so? Well, maybe we should escort you there personally." The elderly gentleman stepped forward. "Leave the young lady alone." The sudden crack of a pistol butt against the old man's head dropped him to the ground. His wife screamed, kneeling beside him as blood trickled from his temple. "Anyone else feeling brave?" The leader's eyes narrowed behind his mask. The search of the coach complete, the bandits collected several bags, including Vivian's trunk containing her clothes and the few keepsakes she'd brought from home. "Mount up," the leader barked. "And as for you fine folks," he glanced at the still unconscious elderly man, "I suggest you start walking. Aztec's only about 15 miles east." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day." The businessman immediately began trudging eastward, not looking back. The elderly woman struggled to rouse her husband. "Wait," Vivian called as the bandits prepared to depart. "You can't leave us here. There's an injured man." The leader wheeled his horse around. "I can do whatever I please, miss, but I'm feeling generous today." He nodded to one of his men who tossed a single canteen onto the ground. "Share that. If you're lucky, someone will come along before nightfall." With that, they galloped away, dust billowing in their wake. Vivian stood frozen, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were stranded in the New Mexico desert with minimal water, an injured man, and miles to go before reaching civilization. For an hour, Vivian and the elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha tried to help Martha's husband, Franklin, regain consciousness. When he finally opened his eyes, he was disoriented and unable to walk far. "You two go on," the businessman said impatiently. "I'm not waiting around to die of thirst or get attacked by Indians." "We can't leave them," Vivian protested, but the man was already walking away, his figure growing smaller against the horizon. By mid-afternoon, the heat had become unbearable. Franklin couldn't continue, so they settled in the meager shade of a small cluster of junipers. Vivian sacrificed her petticoat, tearing it into strips to make a bandage for Franklin's head and a sun's shield for Martha. "My nephew will be waiting for me in Aztec," Vivian said, trying to sound hopeful. "When I don't arrive, he'll surely send someone to look for the coach." Martha nodded weakly, her wrinkled face pale with exhaustion. "You're a good girl, Vivian, so different from what they say about Eastern ladies." Vivian managed a smile. "I came west for a fresh start. Teaching positions for unmarried women are easier to come by out here. As the sun began to lower, Franklin's condition worsened. His breathing grew labored and he slipped in and out of consciousness. "Go, child," Martha whispered. "Follow the road to Aztec. Send help back for us." Vivian hesitated. "I can't leave you. You must," Martha insisted. "Franklin needs a doctor. We've only got a few sips of water left." With great reluctance, Vivian agreed. She left them the remaining water and set out eastward, promising to return with help as quickly as possible. The road was little more than two wheel-rutted tracks cutting through the wilderness. As twilight approached, the temperature dropped rapidly. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she had her shawl from her stolen trunk. Her fashionable boots, perfect for Boston's cobblestone streets, were raising blisters on her feet. The distant howl of coyotes made her quicken her pace. Each shadow in the growing darkness seemed to shift and move. When she heard hoofbeats, Vivian ducked behind a large sagebrush, terrified the bandits had returned. A lone rider appeared on the ridge above the trail, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He paused, then directed his horse down toward the road. As he drew nearer, Vivian could see he was a tall man on a chestnut horse, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a duster coat. For a moment, she considered remaining hidden, but the thought of Martha and Franklin spurred her forward. Stepping onto the trail, she waved her arms. "Hello." "Please, I need help." The rider pulled his horse to a stop, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Who's there?" His voice was deep, cautious. "My name is Vivian Garrison," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "The stagecoach was robbed. There's an injured man and his wife about 3 miles back. They need medical attention." The horseman approached slowly, his features becoming clearer in the fading light. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a sun-weathered face and eyes that assessed her carefully. "Are you hurt, madam?" "No, just stranded." Vivian suddenly felt the full weight of the day's events. Her legs trembled beneath her. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. "I'm Heath Irving. Was headed to my ranch north of Aztec when I spotted buzzards circling back a ways. Found the stagecoach driver. His expression was grim. Didn't expect to find survivors. The bandits took everything but left us alive," Vivian explained. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams are still back there. He's injured badly." Heath nodded, then reached into his saddlebag, producing a canteen. "Drink," he instructed, handing it to her. The water was cool and tasted sweeter than anything Vivian had ever known. She forced herself to take only small sips. "Thank you," she said, returning the canteen. Heath studied her for a moment, taking in her disheveled appearance and the determined set of her jaw. "I'll take you home," he said finally. "But the Williams will get them first," he assured her. "Can you ride?" Vivian nodded, though she'd only ridden Placid Park horses in Boston. Heath helped her mount, then swung up behind her. His chest was solid against her back, his arms forming a secure bracket as he reached around her for the reins. "Hold on," he instructed, and they set off at a steady pace back the way she'd come. They rode in silence, Vivian acutely aware of the stranger's presence. Yet there was something reassuring about his calm confidence and the way he scanned the horizon continuously, alert to any danger. "You're not from around here," Heath observed after a while. "Boston," Vivian replied. "I came to take a teaching position in Aztec. My mother's cousin's son, my second cousin, I suppose, arranged it. He's the only family I have left." Heath didn't press for more details. "Teaching's respectable work. Kids around here need education." They found Martha still awake, keeping vigil beside Franklin. The old man's breathing was shallow, his skin ashen in the moonlight. "Madam," Heath greeted Martha, kneeling beside Franklin to check his pulse. We need to get your husband to a doctor." With gentle efficiency, Heath created a travois from branches and his bedroll, securing it to his horse. They carefully placed Franklin on it, and Heath helped Martha onto the horse. "It's about 10 miles to my ranch," Heath explained. "It's closer than town, and my foreman's wife knows some doctorin'. We'll get you there tonight, then send for the physician from Aztec tomorrow." Vivian prepared to walk alongside, but Heath shook his head. "You'll ride too. I'll lead on foot." Through the night they traveled, Heath guiding the horse across terrain he clearly knew well, sometimes leaving the main trail for shortcuts only a local would recognize. He maintained a steady pace despite the burden of leading a horse carrying 2 riders and pulling a travois. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks visible in the moonlight, a distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, and share brief stories about them. His voice was a comforting counterpoint to the night sounds of the desert. It was past midnight when they finally saw lights in the distance. "That's the main house," Heath said. "We've got a bunkhouse for the hands and a few outbuildings." As they drew closer, Vivian saw a substantial ranch house constructed of adobe and timber. A dog began barking, and moments later, lanterns appeared on the porch. A man hurried out, followed by a woman wrapped in a shawl. "Boss, that you?" "It's me, Diego," Heath called back. "We've got injured folks. Wake Rosa." The next hour passed in a blur. Franklin was carried inside and laid on a bed in a spare room. Rosa, Diego's wife, examined him while Heath explained the situation to his foreman. "Bandits," Diego spat. "Same ones that hit the Simmons place last month, I reckon." "Likely," Heath agreed. "I'll ride to town first thing, fetch the doctor, and alert the sheriff." Vivian found herself ushered into the kitchen, where Rosa's teenage daughter, Lucia, brought her a cup of hot coffee and set about preparing a late meal. "You must be starving, miss," Lucia said kindly. Only then did Vivian realize she hadn't eaten since breakfast on the Stagecoach. The simple fare of beans, tortillas, and sliced beef tasted like a feast. Heath joined her after seeing to the Williams. "Franklin's holding on," he said, accepting a coffee from Lucia. "Rosa thinks the head wound isn't as bad as it looked, but he's an old man, and the shock and exposure took a toll." "Thank you," Vivian said, meeting his eyes. "If you hadn't come along—" Heath dismissed her gratitude with a slight shake of his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "The businessman didn't," Vivian pointed out. "He walked ahead, leaving us behind." A flash of disgust crossed Heath's face. "Some men don't deserve the title." He sipped his coffee. "You said you were heading to family in Aztec." "Yes, my cousin Vernon. He's arranged a teaching position for me at the new school." "I know Vivian Garrison," Heath said with a nod. "Good man. Works at the bank, doesn't he?" "That's right. I haven't seen him since we were children, but he's been very kind in his letters." Heath studied her face. "You've had a long day, Miss Garrison. Lucia can show you to a room. We've plenty of space." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. Besides, there's nothing to be done tonight. I'll ride to Aztec at first light, bring back the doctor for Franklin, and let your cousin know you're safe." Too exhausted to argue, Vivian allowed Lucia to lead her to a small but comfortable bedroom. The young girl brought her a nightgown and a basin of warm water. "It was my sister's before she married," Lucia explained. "She lives in Santa Fe now." Left alone, Vivian washed away the dust of the trail as best she could and changed into the borrowed nightgown. Despite the day's terrors and the strangeness of her surroundings, she fell asleep almost instantly. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the window and the scent of coffee and cooking food. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Dressing quickly in her rumpled traveling clothes, she found her way to the kitchen. Rosa was at the stove stirring something that smelled wonderful, Buenos dias, the woman greeted her. You slept well, I hope? Yes, thank you. How is Mr. Williams? Still resting. His wife is with him. Rosa ladled what turned out to be a porridge-like dish into a bowl. Eat. You need strength. Vivian had just finished her breakfast when she heard hooves outside. Looking through the window, she saw Heath dismounting, accompanied by another rider. That's Dr. Pemberton, Rosa explained. And it seems Heath brought someone else too. Following Rosa outside, Vivian saw a third rider approaching a man in a neat suit on a bay gelding. Vernon, she called, recognizing her cousin from the daguerreotype he'd sent last Christmas. Vivian. Vernon Garrison, a slight man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, dismounted awkwardly. My God, when Mr. Irving rode into town with news of the robbery, I feared the worst. I'm fine, Vivian assured him as he embraced her. Thanks to Mr. Irving. Vernon turned to Heath, who was helping the doctor with his medical bag. I can't thank you enough, sir. If anything had happened to my cousin, no need for thanks, Heath interrupted. Dr. Pemberton needs to see to Franklin Williams right away. As the doctor hurried inside, Vernon turned back to Vivian. I've been worried sick since the stage didn't arrive yesterday. The sheriffs organized a posse to go after the bandits. Did they find the businessman who was with us? Vivian asked. He walked ahead. Halford. Yes, he stumbled into town last night, half dead from exposure. Didn't mention anyone else being alive, just babbled about saving himself. Vernon's expression showed what he thought of such behavior. Vivian wasn't surprised. He left us behind without a second thought. Heath, who had been listening, shook his head in disgust. Some men should stay in the cities where they belong. Vernon cleared his throat. Well, now that I've found you, we should get to town. Your room at the boarding house is ready, and Mrs. Whitman, the headmistress, is anxious to meet you. I'd like to stay until we know Mr. Williams will recover, Vivian said firmly. Vernon looked taken aback but nodded. Of course, that's very considerate of you. You're welcome to wait, Heath said, though the doctor may be some time. Perhaps I should return to town and let Mrs. Whitman know about the delay, Vernon suggested. I have bank business to attend to as well. That seems sensible, Vivian agreed, secretly relieved not to have to leave immediately. After Vernon departed, promising to return the next day, Heath showed Vivian around the ranch. The Irving spread was impressive, several hundred acres with a herd of cattle, horses, and enough farmland to grow feed and some crops for the household. My father started with almost nothing, Heath explained as they walked past the corrals where several cowboys were breaking horses. Built it up over 30 years. When he and my mother passed 5 years ago, I took over. It's a beautiful place, Vivian said sincerely. So different from Boston. Heath's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I imagine so. No cobblestone streets or fancy theaters out here. No, but there's something honest about this landscape. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Heath gave her an appraising look. Most Eastern ladies I've met can't wait to get back to civilization. Perhaps I'm not most Eastern ladies. Vivian surprised herself with her boldness. Heath's eyes, which she now noticed, were a striking hazel, held hers for a moment. No, Miss Garrison, I don't believe you are. They continued their tour, Heath explaining the workings of the ranch with obvious pride. He was knowledgeable but modest, giving credit to his hands for much of the ranch's success. Diego's been foreman since my father's time, he said. Knows more about cattle than anyone for 100 miles. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Pemberton emerged from the house, looking tired but satisfied. Mr. Williams will recover, he announced. The head wound isn't as serious as it appeared, though at his age any injury takes its toll. I've given him something for the pain and left medicine with Rosa. When can they travel? Heath asked. A few days' rest would be best. Then they can take the stage to Durango where they were headed originally. The doctor turned to Vivian. And you, young lady, are fortunate indeed. Exposure is a killer in these parts, especially for those unaccustomed to the climate. I understand that now, Vivian said soberly. After the doctor departed, Vivian visited with Martha and Franklin. The old man was sleeping peacefully. Some color returned to his face. You saved our lives, dear girl, Martha said, patting Vivian's hand. First by going for help, then by finding Mr. Irving. He found me, really, Vivian admitted. Martha's eyes twinkled. A handsome man to be rescued by, wouldn't you say? Vivian felt her cheeks warm. I hadn't noticed, she lied. Martha laughed softly. Of course not, dear. That evening, they ate dinner together in Heath's dining room, a simple but well-made table that Heath mentioned he'd crafted himself. The meal was delicious, with Rosa demonstrating her considerable cooking skills. Afterward, Heath invited Vivian to join him on the porch. The night was cool but pleasant, the sky ablaze with more stars than Vivian had ever seen in Boston. It's magnificent, she breathed, gazing upward. One of the reasons I could never live in a city, Heath said, leaning against a post. Too many buildings, not enough sky. They talked as twilight deepened into night. Heath spoke of his parents, his father, a former cavalry officer who'd claimed land after the Mexican War, his mother, a school teacher from St. Louis. Vivian shared stories of her own parents, both lost to influenza when she was 18, leaving her to make her own way as a companion to a wealthy widow. When the position ended, I had few options, she explained. Unmarried women in Boston have limited respectable employment opportunities. When Vernon wrote about the teaching position here, you seized the chance, Heath finished for her. Yes, though I admit being robbed within sight of my destination wasn't part of my plan, Heath smiled. The West has a way of testing newcomers. Is that what yesterday was, a test? If so, you passed with flying colors, Miss Garrison. Vivian, she corrected him. After what we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities, Mr. Irving. Heath, he replied, his smile warming his features. The next morning, Vernon returned as promised, this time with a wagon. I've brought some necessities for you, he told Vivian. Clothes and such. Mrs. Whitman contributed some items she thought might fit you. Vivian was touched by the thoughtfulness. Please thank her for me. I'll be able to repay everyone once I receive my first month's wages. Vernon waved away her concern. That's what community is for out here. Everyone helps when there's need. He glanced toward the house. How are the Williams? Improving, Vivian reported. The doctor says they can travel in a few days. Excellent. And you'll be ready to come to town then as well? Vivian nodded, though she felt an unexpected reluctance. Yes, of course. Vernon didn't miss her hesitation. Unless you'd prefer to stay longer. No, I need to prepare for the school term, Vivian said quickly. It's just that everyone has been so kind here. Vernon studied her face. Especially Mr. Irving, I imagine. He saved my life, Vivian said simply. Yes, well. Vernon adjusted his spectacles. He's a good man by all accounts, one of the more successful ranchers in the territory. Unmarried, too, which makes him quite the catch according to the ladies in town. Vivian chose not to respond to this unsubtle hint. The next few days passed in a pleasant rhythm. Vivian helped Rosa with household tasks, spent time with the Williams as they regained their strength, and in the evenings, joined Heath on the porch for conversations that stretched long into the night. She learned about ranch life, the challenges of the harsh environment, and the satisfactions of building something lasting. Heath, in turn, listened with genuine interest to her stories of Boston, her teaching experiences, and her dreams for the future. On the third evening, their conversation took a more personal turn. Why have you never married? Vivian asked, immediately regretting her boldness. I'm sorry, that's far too personal a question. Heath didn't seem offended. No, it's fair enough. The simple answer is I've been busy with the ranch. The more complicated answer. He paused, looking out at the darkened landscape. I watched my parents' marriage. They truly loved each other, were partners in everything. I suppose I decided if I couldn't find that kind of bond, I'd rather remain alone. The honesty of his answer touched her. That's remarkably similar to my own thinking. Heath turned to study her face in the lamplight spilling from the window. Is it? My parents had that same partnership. After they died, I had offers comfortable arrangements with respectable men, but they wanted a decorative wife, not a partner. Vivian smiled ruefully. I discovered I'd rather be alone than merely tolerated. I can't imagine any man with sense merely tolerating you, Vivian. The way he said her name, with a gentle emphasis on the first syllable, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the mild evening. You'd be surprised, she replied softly. Independent thinking isn't prized in Boston society, wives. Their loss, Heath said simply. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Rosa called from inside, breaking the spell. The morning the Williams were deemed fit to travel, Vivian knew her time at the Irving ranch was ending. Vernon arrived with the wagon, announcing that the regular stagecoach would take the elderly couple to Durango. And you, cousin, are expected at the boarding house, he added. School begins in 2 weeks, and Mrs. Whitman is eager for you to review the curriculum. Vivian nodded, aware of Heath standing a few paces away, his expression unreadable. I'll just get my things. In the bedroom that had been hers for nearly a week, Vivian gathered the borrowed clothes and the few items Vernon had brought her. She felt a surprising reluctance to leave this place that had been a sanctuary after the terror of the robbery. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rosa stood there, holding a small bundle. Some food for your journey, she said. And this, she pressed a small object into Vivian's hand. A little protection. It was a small carved figure, a saint, Vivian guessed, though she wasn't familiar with Catholic iconography. Santa Barbara, Rosa explained, protector against sudden death and storms. You had enough of the first, maybe this will guard against both. Touched by the gesture, Vivian embraced the woman. Thank you for everything, Rosa. Outside, the Williams were already settled in Vernon's wagon. Heath helped Vivian with her few belongings, his hand briefly covering hers as he took the bag. I can't thank you enough, Vivian said, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. No thanks needed, Heath replied, his voice low. It was my pleasure having you here. Vernon cleared his throat. We should get going if we want to reach town before midday. With final goodbyes to Rosa, Diego, and Lucia, Vivian climbed onto the wagon seat beside her cousin. Heath stood watching as Vernon flicked the reins and the wagon began to move. Mr. Irving, Vernon called back, you must come to town for the Founders' Day celebration next month. The whole county will be there. Heath raised a hand in acknowledgement but made no verbal response. As the wagon pulled away, Vivian couldn't resist looking back. Heath remained where they'd left him, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the ranch he'd built, watching until they disappeared from view. Life in Aztec proved both challenging and rewarding. The town was small but growing, with a diverse population of ranchers, farmers, merchants, and miners from the nearby operations. The schoolhouse was new, a point of pride for the community, and Vivian found herself welcomed warmly by most residents. Her boarding house room was small but comfortable, and Mrs. Whitman proved to be a knowledgeable mentor. The curriculum was basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, but Vivian supplemented it with literature and natural science whenever possible. Her 20 students ranged from 6 to 16, with varying levels of previous education. Some of the ranch children had never attended school before, while others, particularly those from the merchant families, were relatively advanced. What all of them shared was a thirst for knowledge that delighted Vivian. Even the oldest boys, who initially resisted being taught by a city lady, were won over when she demonstrated practical applications for their studies. Vernon was attentive, inviting her to Sunday dinners and introducing her to the town's leading citizens. Vivian suspected he harbored hopes that she might form an attachment to one of the eligible men in Aztec, particularly Edward Thornton, the young lawyer who had recently established a practice. Thornton was handsome, well-spoken, and clearly interested in Vivian. He began calling at the boarding house regularly, bringing books he thought might interest her and inviting her to accompany him on sedate walks through town. "He's quite taken with you, Mrs. Whitman observed one evening as Vivian returned from such a walk. Half the young ladies in town would give their eyeteeth for Edward Thornton's attention. "He's very pleasant company," Vivian acknowledged. Mrs. Whitman raised an eyebrow. "Just pleasant." The man's considered the most eligible bachelor in the county, except perhaps for Heath Irving, but he hardly counts since he never comes to town except for business. Vivian felt her heart quicken at the mention of Heath's name. "Does Mr. Irving not socialize?" "Rarely. He's cordial enough when you encounter him, but he keeps to himself mostly. Some say he's still grieving his parents, others think he's just naturally solitary." Mrs. Whitman shrugged. "A shame, really. He's quite handsome, and that ranch of his will only grow in value." Vivian changed the subject, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But that night, as she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Heath, his quiet confidence, the conversations they'd shared, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Edward Thornton was indeed pleasant company, educated and cultured. He reminded her of the better sort of Boston gentleman. Yet when he took her hand or stood close, she felt none of the awareness she'd experienced in Heath's presence. As the weeks passed, Vivian threw herself into her teaching duties. She organized a small library from donated books, started a school garden where students could learn botany and agriculture, and even arranged excursions to nearby natural features for geology and biology lessons. She wrote to Martha Williams, who had sent a note from Durango reporting that she and Franklin had arrived safely and were recovering well. Martha's reply was warm and included an open invitation to visit should Vivian ever travel to Colorado. The Founders' Day celebration arrived with perfect late summer weather. The entire town of Aztec and most of the outlying ranchers and farmers gathered for what was essentially a county fair, with food, games, music, and dancing. Vivian helped her students prepare recitations and songs for the event. She wore her best dress, a sky blue cotton with white trim that Mrs. Whitman had helped her alter from one of the donated garments. "You look lovely," Vernon said approvingly when he escorted her to the town square where bunting and lanterns had been hung from every available surface. "Edward will be speechless." Vivian smiled politely but didn't respond. She'd been avoiding making any commitment to Edward despite his increasingly obvious intentions. Just yesterday, he'd hinted rather strongly about calling on her father if she had one, a clear prelude to a formal courtship. The celebration was in full swing when they arrived. Tables laden with food lined one side of the square, a platform for performances stood on another, and the center had been cleared for dancing. Children darted between groups of adults, their excitement palpable. Edward found her almost immediately, looking handsome in a new suit. "Miss Garrison, you're a vision," he said, bowing slightly. "May I secure your company for the first dance?" Before Vivian could respond, a disturbance at the edge of the square caught everyone's attention. A group of riders had arrived, and at their center was Heath Irving. Vivian's heart performed an undignified leap at the sight of him. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, wearing a crisp white shirt under a black vest, his usual work clothes replaced by what appeared to be his Sunday best. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and he nodded in greeting. "Irving actually came," Edward muttered, sounding displeased. "That's a surprise." Vivian barely heard him, watching as Heath dismounted and was immediately surrounded by people welcoming him. He shook hands with the men and tipped his hat to the ladies, but his gaze kept returning to where Vivian stood. "About that dance," Edward prompted. "Of course," Vivian said, allowing him to lead her to the dance area where others were already assembling for a Virginia reel. As the dance progressed, Vivian found herself watching for Heath. He remained on the periphery, talking with some of the ranchers, a cup of punch in his hand. Only when the dance ended and Edward led her back to Vernon did Heath approach. "Miss Garrison," he greeted her, his voice warm. "You look well. Teaching seems to agree with you." "Mr. Irving," Vivian replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her pleasure at seeing him. "Yes, I've found my place here, I think. Glad to hear it." He nodded to Vernon and Edward. "Gentlemen." Edward's response was coolly polite, but Vernon seemed genuinely pleased. "Good to see you in town, Irving. How's the ranch? Thriving? We're expanding the herd next spring." The conversation continued, with Edward contributing little and Heath directing most of his comments to Vivian and Vernon. He asked about Vivian's students, seeming genuinely interested in her teaching methods. "Your enthusiasm does you credit," he said when she described the school garden. "Those children are fortunate to have you as their teacher." Edward finally interrupted. "Miss Garrison has indeed been a blessing to the community. I've secured the next dance, if you'll excuse us." As Edward led her away, Vivian glanced back to see Heath watching them, his expression unreadable. Throughout the evening, Vivian was aware of Heath's presence even when he wasn't nearby. She danced with several partners, including Vernon and some of her students' fathers, but Heath never approached her for a dance. It was nearing midnight when she found herself momentarily alone, having escaped the rather stuffy tent where matrons were serving coffee and pie. The night air was cool, the stars brilliant overhead reminding her of evenings on Heath's porch. "Needed some air." Heath's voice came from the shadows beside the schoolhouse. Vivian started, then smiled as he stepped into the light cast by a nearby lantern. "Yes." "It's been a wonderful celebration, but rather crowded." Heath moved to stand beside her, both of them looking up at the stars. "Thornton seems quite attentive." "He's been very kind since I arrived," Vivian said carefully. "He's a good man, smart, going places." Heath's voice was neutral. "He'd make a fine husband for a schoolteacher." Vivian felt a flicker of disappointment. Was Heath encouraging her toward Edward? "Perhaps," she said, "though I'm not certain we want the same things from life." Heath turned to look at her directly. "What do you want, Vivian?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. Before she could answer, Edward's voice called from nearby. "Miss Garrison, are you out here?" Heath stepped back immediately, increasing the distance between them. "You should go. He's looking for you." "Heath, it's been good seeing you," he said, already turning away. "Give my regards to the Williams if you write to them." He disappeared into the darkness between buildings before Edward rounded the corner. "There you are," Edward said, relief evident in his voice. "I was concerned when I couldn't find you." "I just needed some fresh air," Vivian explained, hoping her disappointment wasn't visible. Edward offered his arm. "Well, shall we return? The final dance is about to begin, and afterward I hoped we might have a private word." Vivian hesitated, then placed her hand on his arm. Actually, Edward, I'm feeling rather tired. Would you mind escorting me back to the boarding house? Edward's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Of course. Your comfort is my primary concern. As they walked through town, Edward spoke of his plans expanding his law practice, possibly running for county judge in a few years. It was a promising future, one many women would eagerly share. At the boarding house steps, he turned to her. Vivian, Miss Garrison, I've made no secret of my admiration for you. I had hoped tonight to formally request permission to court you. Vivian took a deep breath. Edward, you honor me with your attention, truly, but I don't think I can give you the answer you're hoping for. His expression clouded. Is there someone else? It's not that simple, Vivian said, though Heath's face immediately came to mind. I'm still finding my place here. Teaching is my priority right now. Edward studied her face. It's Irving, isn't it? I saw the way you looked at him tonight. This isn't about Mr. Irving or anyone else, Vivian insisted, though even to her own ears the denial lacked conviction. It's about what I want for my life. After a moment, Edward nodded stiffly. I see. Well, I respect your honesty, if nothing else. He bowed slightly. Good night, Miss Garrison. Vivian watched him walk away, feeling a mixture of regret and relief. Edward deserved someone who could love him wholeheartedly, and she knew now that person couldn't be her. 2 days later, as Vivian was dismissing her students for the day, she was surprised to see Heath's foreman, Diego, waiting outside the schoolhouse. Señorita Garrison, he greeted her. The boss asks if you could spare some time to visit the ranch. The Williams have sent a package for you, and he thought you might like to collect it personally. Vivian's pulse quickened. A package? They could have posted it to town. Diego shrugged. The boss said it seemed important. He sent the buggy for your comfort. He gestured to where a smart 2-wheeled buggy waited, driven by one of the ranch hands. I see. Vivian considered for a moment. Let me inform Mrs. Whitman that I'll be away for dinner. An hour later, she was on the road to Heath's ranch, questions tumbling through her mind. Why hadn't Heath come himself? What could the Williams have sent that warranted a special trip? The ranch looked much as she remembered it, though the late summer light cast different shadows across the buildings. Rosa greeted her warmly, exclaiming over how well she looked and insisting she come inside for refreshments. Where is Mr. Irving? Vivian asked after accepting a glass of lemonade. In the south pasture, Rosa replied. He said to make you comfortable and that he'd return before sundown. The package from the Williams turned out to be a small wooden box containing a beautifully embroidered shawl and a letter from Martha. Vivian read it with growing confusion. My dear girl, Martha wrote, when I saw this, I thought immediately of you. It will suit your coloring beautifully and provide warmth on those cool New Mexico evenings when you might be enjoying the stars with a certain gentleman. Franklin and I often speak of how fortunate we all were that day on the trail, though fortune seems too mild a word for what might be providence. Perhaps you've already recognized the opportunity that adversity presented. If not, an old woman begs your indulgence for offering advice. Life is too short and love too precious to waste on convention or caution. With deepest affection, Martha Williams. Vivian reread the letter, then carefully folded it away. Martha had clearly seen something during their brief time together at the ranch, something Vivian herself had been reluctant to acknowledge. She was standing on the porch, the new shawl around her shoulders and her thoughts in disarray, when Heath rode in. He dismounted smoothly, handing his horse to a waiting ranch hand, and approached the house. You came, he said, as if slightly surprised despite having sent for her. Diego said there was a package, Vivian replied, holding up the shawl. It's beautiful, Heath nodded. Martha chose well. He hesitated, then gestured to the porch chairs. "Would you like to sit? You've had a long journey." They sat in what began as an awkward silence, so different from their easy conversations during her stay. Finally, Vivian spoke. "Heath, why did you really ask me to come?" He looked out across his land for a long moment before answering. "I heard about Thornton, that you refused him." "News travels fast," Vivian observed, wondering how he'd learned of it. "Small communities," Heath said with a slight shrug. "Vernon mentioned it when I was in town yesterday on business." Of course Vernon would have told him. Her cousin had never hidden his hope for a match between them. "Edward is a good man," Vivian said, echoing Heath's own words from the Founders' Day celebration, "but not the right man for me." "And what sort of man would be right for you?" Heath asked, his eyes meeting hers directly. Vivian took a deep breath, deciding honesty was the only path forward. "Someone who sees me as a partner, not an ornament, someone who values independence of mind and spirit. Someone who understands that sometimes the most unexpected meetings can change the course of a life." Heath's expression softened. "Someone who might find a Boston schoolteacher stranded on a desert trail and think he'd never seen anyone braver." "Perhaps," Vivian said, her heart racing. Heath reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "I'm not good with pretty words, Vivian, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you left." "Then why didn't you come to town? Why wait until now?" "I saw how Thornton looked at you. Heard people talking about what a suitable match you'd make. Figured a cultured lady like you would prefer a lawyer to a rancher." Heath's grip tightened slightly. "I was giving you the chance to find your place here without complications. And if I've found that my place might be here with you?" Vivian asked softly. Heath's smile transformed his face. "Then I'd say that day the stagecoach was robbed turned out to be the luckiest day of my life." He leaned forward, his free hand gently cupping her cheek, and Vivian met him halfway. The kiss was tender, a promise rather than a demand, and when they drew apart, Vivian knew with certainty that she'd found what her parents had, a true partnership. "Stay for dinner," Heath said, his voice husky. "Stay the night. Rosa's already prepared your old room, hoping you would." Vivian laughed. "Was everyone plotting this except us? It appears so." Heath stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "I meant what I said that first day, you know. I'll take you home, Vivian. Whether that's to town tonight or here permanently, that's for you to decide." "I think," Vivian said, resting her head against his chest, "that home might be wherever you are." In the weeks that followed, Vivian continued teaching while spending weekends at the ranch. Heath courted her properly, calling at the boarding house and escorting her to church on Sundays. The town quickly adjusted to seeing them together, and if Edward Thornton was bitter about her choice, he kept it to himself. Vernon was openly delighted, confessing that he'd hoped for just such an outcome when he'd arranged her teaching position. "Though I never imagined it would take a stagecoach robbery to bring you two together," he admitted. By Christmas, Heath had formally proposed, offering a ring that had belonged to his mother. The wedding was set for June after the school term ended. Martha and Franklin Williams made the journey from Durango for the ceremony, which was held in Aztec's small church with nearly the entire county in attendance. Vivian wore a cream-colored gown that Rosa and Lucia had helped her make, with Martha's shawl draped around her shoulders despite the summer warmth. As Heath spoke his vows, his voice steady and sure, Vivian remembered that moment on the trail when she'd first seen him silhouetted against the darkening sky, a stranger who would become the center of her world. The reception was held at the Irving Ranch, where tables had been set up under the cottonwood trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and the kind of community celebration that made the West's hardships worthwhile. Late in the evening, Heath led Vivian away from the festivities to the quiet of the porch where they'd first begun to know each other. "Happy, Mrs. Irving?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Vivian replied truthfully. "I've been thinking," Heath said, his expression thoughtful. "We could convert the old storage room into a proper schoolroom for the ranch children and eventually—" He paused, looking suddenly shy. "Our own." Vivian felt a rush of love so intense it almost took her breath away. "I think that's a wonderful idea." They sealed the agreement with a kiss, the sounds of celebration providing a backdrop to their private moment. Above them, the stars shone as brilliantly as they had the night Heath had found her stranded and alone, the night he had promised to take her home, and in doing so, had given her a home she'd never dreamed of finding. A year later, Vivian stood on that same porch, their infant son cradled in her arms. Heath joined her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as they gazed out at the land that would one day belong to little Franklin Irving, named for the old man whose injury had brought them all together. "I got a letter from Martha today," Vivian said. "They're coming to visit next month. She says she can't wait to meet her namesake." Heath smiled. "We'll have to thank them properly for their part in bringing us together." "A stagecoach robbery, a head injury, and an elderly couple's matchmaking," Vivian laughed softly. "Not exactly the romance I imagined as a girl." "No," Heath agreed, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "It's better. It's real." As if in agreement, the baby stirred and yawned, his tiny hand clutching his father's finger. In the distance, the sun was setting over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Vivian leaned into her husband's embrace, remembering the terror and uncertainty of that day on the trail, how lost she had felt, how afraid. She could never have imagined then that being stranded would lead her to everything she'd ever wanted. "Thank you," she whispered. Heath looked down at her, his expression questioning. "For finding me," Vivian explained. "For taking me home." Heath's smile deepened, reaching his eyes and warming them to gold in the fading light. "Always," he promised, and Vivian knew it was one he would keep for all the days to come.